Good afternoon. Tolstoy once said that the world is a dangerous place. Because there's danger out there, there are those who must go for us. Of all the readings that I am familiar with, of those men, women, particularly men, in that venture far before women joined the forces, one reading in the scriptures that's favored above all, because the rank and file of those soldiers who went were not just Christians. They came from all walks of life. Some had no tradition at all. And the chaplains who dealt with them, preparing them for battle, at the edge of a fight, I suspect, particularly in Normandy, the references were that the 23rd Psalm was always read to the troops. A shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my entire life. Let us pray. Our gracious God, in all times, and even now, and certainly in our future, we long for a shepherd. We know the shepherd's voice. We understand his leading, his prodding, his loving, his shaping, his petting, his urging, his hoping. We all need a shepherd. And those men who knew that combat were praying for a shepherd. Protect me, help me, understand me, hear me as I face the perils of death. So thank you, Lord, for the shepherds that have kept us and those who gave their lives for us in order that our herd might be kept intact. In the glorious name of our living Father, we make this prayer. Amen.
I wish I was on yonder hill, just there I'd sit and tribute event honoring Norman Lane Jr., one of our own. I first of all want to make recognition of a couple of groups of special guests that we have with us today. First of all, to my left is Norman's kid sister, Linda Lane Farmer, and her family. Linda. And secondly, we have several sort of subgroups, I guess I might say. One particular group, all from Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, Norman Lane's unit in Vietnam. First of all, from Brownsville, Tennessee and Sydney, Arkansas, Corporal Allen Willyerd. Corpsman Tony Milazzo from Paterson, New Jersey. Lance Corporal Randy Gensimer from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And Corpsman Doc Nunn from Ballad, New Mexico. Vietnam veterans from Norman's group and location. I want to welcome the gentleman from the Marine Corps League Detachment 735 based in Jackson, and also Mr. Gerald Presley from Chattanooga, who drove to be with us here today, as well as John Carlos from the Green Berets and 101st Airborne. Before Lynn Shaw gives his first opening presentation, talk, discussion of his times and memories of Norman, I wrote down a couple of things the other night but didn't have time to commit them to memory, so I'm just going to read it if you'll allow me to. The first has to do with some thoughts on the subject of miracles, and I'm just, as I said, going to read it. March 29, 1968 remains a day when any and all of us would have prayed for a miracle that would not happen. My own experience with miracles, like those described in the Old Testament, started out on a pretty questionable footing. As my mom will attest, she took me to Memphis when I was only 3 to see the newly released movie, The 10 Commandments. While most of the audience enjoyed the exhilarating parting of the Red Sea as Moses led his people out of bondage, my mom's strongest collection of that day is that of her 3-year-old crying when the Pharaoh's horses all drowned as the sea closed down on them. So much for miracles. But that was 60 years ago, and life has gone on for all of us. The best of times, the worst of times, the season of light, the season of darkness, the spring of hope, the winter of despair, events that we have no control over, except to wonder sometimes why and where is our miracle, or is such a thing possible? So today I look out on this sea of faces in this nearly packed sanctuary, filled with people of all ages and all walks of life, who have come with one common purpose, that is to honor one of our own, who left our midst in this life over 46 years ago, which is rather amazing when you think of it, considering that his own all too short life ended only 5 weeks after his 27th birthday. People who knew Norman Lane Jr. have come to remember him. People who knew him a little have come to learn more about him. And people, many people, who never met or knew Norman Jr. are here so that they can come to know him. And I look here on the front row, and I see Norman Jr.'s kid sister Linda, and her own beautiful extended family, and the nieces and nephews that Norman Jr. never knew, and their own children. And on this side, I see Norman Jr.'s dear friend and brother in peace and in war, Allen Willyerd, and his brothers Doc Nunn, Tony Milazzo, and Randy Gensimer, reunited for the first time since they last saw each other at Khe Sanh in 1968, having been plucked from the jungles of Vietnam at different times in that year. And all of this leads me to the overriding question: is it possible that the miracle that we so fervently would have prayed for on that black day in 1968, is it possible that here today, July 12, 2014, that we could be witnessing a totally different manifestation of that same miracle? Many in the audience were not born in 1968, and I've come to know with our own 2 sons that the appreciation of history and the times is something that was very much in vogue when I was in high school, but maybe not so much these days. So, mostly to the younger generation, I wanted to read to you about 1968, the year that these guys came back from Vietnam, the year that Norman Jr. was laid to eternal rest in the Tabernacle Cemetery. And this comes from Charles Dickens. It's excerpted from A Tale of Two Cities, which was written in about 1850. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. 1968 is a good example of that kind of expression, I think. In that spring, Richard Carlton and I had both just turned 16 years old, just to put some perspective on the times. We were working to complete our sophomore year at Haywood High School with Elizabeth Weddington and Nancy Helen Thornton and maybe others that I don't recognize. That May, as a tip to Patsy Roy, I was about to begin work as a student clerk with Mr. Shane Roy and Roy Drug Company on Court Square. Norman Jr. had come home to his eternal resting place that spring. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been murdered the day before Norman Jr.'s funeral service, and Senator Robert F. Kennedy had 2 months to live. The worst of times. Also in 1968, at least 4 of the men who are with us today, Corporal Allen Willyerd, Corpsman Doc Nunn, Corpsman Tony Milazzo, and Lance Corporal Randy Gensimer, all came home safely, the best of times, from the extreme violence just south of the demilitarized zone that separated North and South Vietnam. As a 16-year-old, Richard and I knew none of these men. Randy, in fact, was only 20 years old in 1968, nor did we know anything of their circumstances. I knew nothing of what they had experienced on a daily basis for up to 13 months, fighting a vicious and well-trained, determined enemy, losing friends and brothers in combat, fighting somewhat helplessly as artillery rounds from off-limits enemy positions within and north of the DMZ crashed down on their own units. Most significantly, I knew nothing of the circumstances on the day that each man returned to home soil. Were there parades? Were there handshakes? Or was there even indifference? I don't know. But today, as we gather to remember their brother Norman Lane Jr., I do know one thing, and I hope that all of the audience will hear me as I say it aloud. Allen Willyerd, Doc Nunn, Tony Milazzo, Randy Gensimer, and the other of you gentlemen, thank you for being here today to help us remember Norman Lane Jr. Thank you for your service to our country, and most importantly, welcome home and God bless you.
You know, Norman would have liked this. He would have liked this a lot. He was the kind of person who always liked to stand before people and talk to them about any subject you want to talk about. And he was always willing to listen to anything you had to say. And he'd add things to it, you know. He'd make you think that you were something original that you'd said, and he would go into details if you knew anything about the subject. So it's good that this gathering is happening. It's good that we are here to remember Norman Lane because he was truly a unique person. I might add that in the Haywood County Museum, we have Norman's dress pinks. You people in the front row know what those are. And we were able to get that from Norman's mother and get that uniform back in first-class condition, and it's in the museum today. So sometime when you're at Haywood County Museum, be sure to see it. I'm going to say just a few words about the little trip that Norman and I took early on. I guess we were about 15 years old. And I had been told a story by my father about the time that he rode his bicycle down to Open Lake. You know, people grow up, they like to do the things that their parents have done, and sort of want to top it, you know, do something more than he did. He told about the trip going to Open Lake. His father would go 2 weeks every year, and that was his vacation. And they would spend it in a tent down at Open Lake and go fishing. Well, Daddy was left at home, and he took his bicycle and he rode over to Ripley, the first stop on his journey. And this was dirt roads now. And he said he was so tired by the time he got to Ripley, he went to sleep in the courthouse yard there in Ripley. And when he got, you know, away, he continued on down to Open Lake. Well, the land sort of goes along pretty good till you get to Ark. Ark was a little community there going down into the Mississippi bottoms. And it's real good on a bicycle going down. Not good coming back up. But Norman and I had experienced lots of stopping. We stopped at Man's store, we stopped at 10 other stores, every store that was open between there and till we got down to Open Lake. And the lake store, as it was called at the time, was closed for some reason. So we had to bike on down to the next store on down the road there, which was on stilts because the water gets over the land down there when the Mississippi River overflows. So we went past Open Lake. We went on further, 3 or 4 more miles on down and stopped at that store, and we figured we'd done enough. So we all bought, I guess, 6 or 7 drinks apiece that day and started back to Brownsville. Well, later on, I figured it up. It was 79 miles round trip. And we pushed the bikes and rode the bikes and cussed the bikes and did everything we could do. The thing that made it so bad was that Norman had borrowed the bicycles. And he had got 2 24-inch bicycles. Well, we were beyond 24-inch bicycles with balloon tires. So we had to suffer with those bicycles. Finally, after pedaling and going on, we pushed it back up that tall hill at Ark. We got on the road, 19 highway, and made it on back. But you know, it was Norman. This gives you an idea of something about his character. I had just mentioned the story about my father's doing this, but Norman was the instigator. He was the one that said, look, we need to do this trip. You need to go on and do this thing. And through his urging, that's what happened, and that's what we did that hot day in the summer when we were about 15 years old.
Did you say thank you for getting to do this?
Absolutely.
Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. That was one of Norman's very favorite quotes by Mahatma Gandhi. The way I got to know Norman as well as I did was at camp meeting. He knew so much about constellations in the night sky and the related mythology. Many hours were spent by a small group of us. Many hours were spent by a small group of us lying on our backs on blankets in the old ball field. Norman was thorough and a planner. I received a letter from him in October. asking for music and words for Christmas carols. He wanted to be able to lead his men for the Christmas season in singing Christmas carols halfway around the world. Cokesbury in Nashville found a beautifully decorated book of Christmas carols and some just plain words, and I sent those to you. Norman's favorite hymn was On Jordan's Stormy Banks I Stand, which I will ask you to join in singing. Jack is here. Thank you, Lord. In a few minutes. But let me read the third verse and the second verse to you. No chilling winds nor poisonous breath can reach that healthful shore. Sickness and sorrow, pain and death are felt and feared no more. All o'er those wide extended plains shines one eternal day. There God the Son forever reigns and scatters night away. Sing aloud.
Claiborne. I didn't know it was Al Claiborne. But I do want to thank Al and all of his research and his relentless pursuit to have this come together. The emails that have been swapped for the last, I guess, 5 or 6 months have been unbelievable for me because it's been an awakening of memories of 50 and 60 years ago. And I can't believe I just said 50 or 60 years ago. I just can't get my life, I can't get a grasp on how fast life goes. But 50 or 60 years ago. I want to thank the family for giving us permission to do this. And I want to thank all the vets that are here, the brothers. And I knew Norman as a cousin, as a teacher, and as a friend. And as a cousin growing up here, I'll just be honest with you, I thought Norman was very strange. And when I would see him lead the kids around like the Pied Piper, and he'd tell them about what this plant was and what this flower was, and about the different mushrooms or whatever it was, he knew everything about everything. And like Lynn said, I thought it was, at the time, strange that you'd go out to the ball field and lay on the blanket, and he knew every star and every constellation, and we were going, he could be telling us a lie. But I thought he was strange about everything because he knew so much. His intellect was there. So, but let me just tell you this: it was strange in a good way. And as a teacher, he was on, I guess you say, he pushed the envelope, and he was on the cutting edge, as evident by the required reading in our sophomore English class. I think it went over the heads of the principals and all the other people. It was very risque in what he had us read. And he was he had an ability to be a teacher and yet be a friend. But when we got back into the classroom, he still commanded the respect of a teacher. Not many people can do that. Norman could do that. I'd love to sit down and talk to him about that again. A few years ago, I stood up here and had a few brief comments about my Uncle Bill at his funeral. And I mentioned my father and some other uncles and about it being the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw said. And I think that's right. Norman's dad was part of that generation. And I have come to recognize and realize that there are great people that serve in every generation. Norman was one. We have gentlemen here that are great people that choose to serve. And so in closing, I just want to salute the family for the great sacrifice that their family has made, and also at the same time I want to salute you guys and all vets for what they have done in the past, what they're doing now, and what they'll do in the future. Good talk.
I'm not part of the family out here, but I used to come out here when we were in high school. This is back. I believe it's fitting that we're here today because Norman Langridge serves this tribute. The first day I met Norman Lang was in the fall of 1966. He was our sophomore English teacher. My first thought was he was the most beautiful man I had ever seen in my life. My second thought was, how did I get so lucky? And then, as we were settling into class, a couple of them were cutting up, I'm sure Mac was one of them. And he used profanity to get them in line. And so, of course, we couldn't believe that. And unfortunately, George Herring was standing right outside the door. And I'm sure Norman got in trouble for that. But we had never heard a teacher cuss before, especially in class, so we were really impressed. It was a really good You know, as you grow older, you realize the importance of the impact people have on your lives. And Norman was one of those people for me. I've told hundreds and hundreds of people in my lifetime that he was my best teacher. And I had wonderful teachers in high school and all years. But he was so good because of one simple reason. He taught us the joy and the importance of learning. Didn't matter what you were learning. And for that, I thank him because I have enjoyed a lifetime of learning. And over the last 40 years of my life, I've had a lot of careers, and I learned something from everything I did, and I use it in the next thing I did. And my husband always said I should be a teacher, I guess, because I liked helping the kids. But 9 years ago, I became a teacher. I had the opportunity to start teaching. And I learned my teaching skills from Norman Lang, and I use them every day that I'm in the classroom. I encourage my students to be curious. I tell them they need to learn something new every single day. I teach media, so Of course, what they need to do is be curious about what they're going to do. I let them select their own subjects, what they're going to write about. I help them do research. I pose questions so that they'll dig deeper and learn more. And I tell them, you have to learn something new every day. Norman was also, had a way of making everybody feel important and special. And when we wrote our English papers, he would comment on them. He would grade them, but he would also critique them. And I don't ever remember getting one back that he didn't say something nice about what I had written. So I take that as a cue for my children. I tell my students every day something they have done well, you know, no matter what it is. And maybe that's why I became a writer, because I wrote for a long time for the newspaper. I hope that my students will learn to love to learn. That's, you know, that was the most thing. And you know, talking about the constellations, we all went out to Norman's grandparents one night and laid on blankets by the pond and learned about the constellations too. You know, I was also encouraged because Norman wrote some of his letters after he left, and I received a lot of letters and got a lot of advice. Sometimes I couldn't believe the advice he was giving a 16-year-old, and I was like, you know, my mother probably didn't need to read this, but, but anyway, I remember the day, the moment that I heard that Norman Lane had been killed. I was getting ready to be in the Miss Brownsville pageant. My mother came to the beauty shop and told me. It was devastating. I remember that Mac and I went to the funeral home together, and for some reason we were the first ones there. The only lights on were those two big lights at the end of the casket. I remember that, and I remember us standing there, and nobody else had come yet. And I remember thinking, at 17 years old, I remember thinking what a profound loss for so many of us. Now, all of these years later, I've cherished all these memories, and because of you and all the work that all the people have done to put this together, we get to share these memories. And I want to say that my life was richer having known him. And you know that Norman never met a stranger, so think about how many people he influenced over the years. Vietnam was our era. We had friends who served and some who, like Norman, who made the ultimate sacrifice. I remember our soldiers not receiving the honor they deserved. I thought at that time, and I still believe it was one of the worst times in American history, that we would let our soldiers come home and they not be thanked and appreciated for their service. So I want you to know that I appreciate all of you and every bit of service that you gave to us. I thank everybody for coming today to help us honor your Tabernacle son, my teacher and friend. He was one of a kind, and I'll always remember him. Becky's going to talk, and I had him for English, she had him for French, which reminded me that he taught us the words to Michelle, the Beatles song. I think they were okay, though.
I wanted to start by thanking Al and his team for having this gathering in tribute to Norman, and for bringing everyone together today. Nobody wants to follow Mac and Rita. Mac is so funny, and she's got away with words, and then there's me, so if you dozed off, go back to sleep. I've been asked to share a few memories of Norman, and he was my teacher and my friend. Let me start with the teacher. And you'll understand why he would be such an important part to me, of me, and so many others. He was an amazing teacher. His love of knowledge was what made him such an interesting teacher and made his students anxious to learn more from him and about him. He could take an everyday event and make a teaching moment for his class. I was in his French class, and I remember when he started running in the mornings before school. It was interesting because no one was running in those days. It was not a common form of exercise. He would come back and tell us about stopping to talk to the cows. I don't know what they said, but he would tell us that he had spoken with them and that they had communicated with them. We didn't go further. I'm not sure who does that anymore. But then there would follow a lesson on cows a lot of times, so we learned a lot about cows. And this was only one of the many lessons that did not include French conversation. I I think earlier Amy and I were talking about if you didn't have your homework, the best thing to do is ask him a question about something else. The whole hour would be spent on that thing. I did learn foreign languages though. I learned to speak a few words of Swahili. I learned a few words of German, and he actually taught us how to swear in German. He told us never to use that word around anybody that spoke German, and he wouldn't tell us what it meant. So, therefore, I don't use it. I remember it, but I don't remember the Swahili. So he taught us, and probably some other languages that I've forgotten about. I particularly remember when he joined the Marines. I remember that he had said once he wanted to do everything once. It stuck with me when I heard that he was enlisting and when he left for OCS, and he would write to me and Rita and maybe some others, but he would tell us about his experiences. His letters were so interesting, and he usually tried to tell me something that might be new for me, so it was another teaching moment for Norman. Thinking about it now, it seems really strange, but in one letter he talked about yogurt. Now, yogurt had not made its way to Haywood County yet, that I had, so I didn't really understand. But he told me about it. He described the texture, the color, the taste, where it came from. He talked all about it, where he got it, and didn't tell me about the people that introduced him to it or that he was sharing it with. It was really strange sometimes. But I always felt like I was there. I always learned something from it. It was a simple thing, but he made everything so interesting. On weekends, in the towns around Brownsville, those of you that grew up here, a few years ago, probably remember this, but there were always dances. There would be a dance, if it wasn't in Brownsville on Friday and Saturday night, it'd be Ripley, Covington, Dyersburg, Alamo, Trenton, Milan, any of the towns around here, and everyone would go. You usually go Friday night and Saturday night to wherever the dances were. Norman was home for a visit once, and the dance was in Dyersburg, and most of us were not allowed to drive out of town yet because we were just learning to drive, so we couldn't go out of town. So Norman agreed to take us to Trenton, and that was the most fun night I've ever had. I mean, he was just great. He drove, our parents were thrilled because we had an adult taking us. and we were just waiting to go, so it was a fun time. I'm not sure about that adult part. It was fun, it was interesting. He told us stories about his travels on the way there, and we just did a lot of, we'd stop and have Cokes, and he'd just entertain us all the way there and all the way back. And I was impressed even then that he would come home and make time for his students, that he was still interested in teaching us. And some things we needed, some things we didn't. On one of his trips home, he spent some time with his family, and then he picked up a few of us just to go riding. Rita was probably one of them. I don't know, I can't remember who I was there. But we rode around and just talked, and we got Cokes, and he told us some of what he had been doing. And then he said, I've got to go pack some things. We're going to go by, and y'all can come help me pack. There's some things I want to give you. And he gave all of us something. For me, he gave me several books, and a couple of those I had to hide. And, I couldn't be caught with those. And he was in trouble with me too. But, and after the funeral, I put the books away, and they are still put away in the attic because it's just painful. One of the most important things that I realized from Norman was that teachers are just regular people. They have families, they have friends, they have lives outside of school. They get sick, they get well, they get angry, they worry. For me, there were the good ones and the mean ones. Those were the only two teachers we had. We had the good ones and the mean ones. And none of them were my friends, I can tell you, other than Norman. They were either easy teachers or hard teachers, but they weren't my friends. But he changed forever the way I look at teachers. Ironically, now I work with an elementary school, and I work with advanced readers on pre-K through 3rd grade. And I think Norman would approve of my method. It's not like the other teachers or anybody doing there. It's a little different, a little outside the box. It's something that he would approve of, I believe. So his legacy lives on through his children and his family, through his students and his family, his friends, his veterans. We all have memories. And I think he would be proud of this tribute to his life and his service I believe he's smiling down on us today with gratitude that we have wonderful memories of his time with us. Like Rita, I thank you veterans for your service, and I thank the families that waited at home. And thank you for your sacrifice, and we honor you too. Thank you.
Well, first of all, like some of the others have mentioned, I really want to thank Al Claiborne for all his efforts with his committee to put this event and other things that are proposed together. As you see from the program, I am from Vancouver, in British Columbia, Canada, and I'm a sports historian, writing books and a column in the local paper. So, how many of you here actually knew Norman? Oh, wonderful. But I'm wondering if maybe there are some things that you didn't know about him, particularly about his youth, because he spent his youth in Vancouver. Norman arrived in Vancouver just before his 10th birthday in January of 1951, actually in West Vancouver, which is a suburb. I live in North Vancouver. North Vancouver and West Vancouver high schools were the main rivals in our communities. I am a year younger than Norman would be. And I never met, as far as I know, I never met Norman. But as I mentioned earlier, that because I'm a sports historian, there is a story that I will get to about Norman and his football. He was 14 when, actually he was, in 1954, the British Columbia Lions joined the Canadian Football League. And you know what it's like when, when the Olympics are on, everybody wants to be a gymnast, or they want to be a swimmer, or whatever is happening. Or like when the World Cup is on, they want to play soccer, they want to be a soccer player. So when the BC Lions joined the professional circuit, a lot of people, kids, wanted to play football. So Norman and a lot of his friends would go out and play touch football on the street. A lot of them were unpaved at the time. Or they played tackle football, at the field somewhere. And their dads, some of their dads, thought that this wasn't a good idea, that they should be coached properly, they should have pads, they should have helmets. And so they formed a league, a six-man league, 4 teams, called the West Vancouver Six-Man League in 1955, when Norman was 14. And Norman turned out to be one of the star players. He caught 9 touchdown passes in 6 league games. In fact, he scored at least 1 touchdown in 5 of those 6 league games. He scored a touchdown in the first ever game played in the West Vancouver Six-Man League. In one game which they lost, he scored all 3 touchdowns. And the West Vancouver newspaper, West Vancouver News at the time, was so enthralled with the catches that he was making that, I'm going to quote here, this is their comment on the game. The Tiger Cats, that was Norman's team, had one potent scoring combination, a McLaughlin pass to Lane. It worked 3 times, with Lane making real Dan Edwards catches. Now the Edwards reference was to the BC Lions end, who led the team in 1955 with 41 catches and 3 touchdowns in 16 games. So Edwards must have made some nice catches, of course. But considering Lane had 9 touchdowns in 6 games, maybe Edward should have been noted as making real Norman Lane catches. Now, Mike McLaughlin was the quarterback who threw all those passes to Norman. And he remembers Norman as, and I quote, very quick, reliable, and with good hands. But I also talked at length with perhaps Norman's best friend in high school, just before I left for coming here, Dave DeGrucci, who was unable to come. His wife's health isn't the best, and he felt that he couldn't make the trip here. But talking about his football, he called Norman speedy and shifty, and you just grab the air trying to tackle him. But more than that, as a friend, he was, and I'm again using his exact words, he was always reliable, always dependable, the first one to help you. He had a sense of humor that Dave enjoyed, and Dave remembers Norm had an uplifting spirit. He was never down. He didn't grumble about things. They went on camping trips, and if you do have a look at that poster that Al has put together, you'll see a photo of Norman standing, or I think it's standing or sitting, next to a tent. And I was able to get that, although Linda already has a copy of that, but I was able to get a copy of that and give it to Al for that poster. I thought it was pretty interesting that a picture of him on a mountainside in West Vancouver would be symbolic of a camp meeting. So Norman and Dave only played 1 year of football. They were too old the next year, and for some reason or other they didn't play for the high school team because the West Van Football League was a community league. West Van High didn't actually have a football team until, which is probably one of the reasons he didn't play, until he was, I think, about grade 11 and 12, and obviously he was pretty busy at that time with his school because, as some of you may know, he did 4 years in 3 on the accelerated program. Now, I did have I was able to talk to the current principal at West Vancouver Secondary School and say, you know, what I'm doing, I'm coming down, and would it be possible to get Norman Lane's permanent record card? This isn't something that is kind of allowed. You can't allow it out of the school, but considering the circumstances, he said he would check it out, but he said, after 50 years, we shred these, and this is now 56 years since he had graduated in 1958. 10 minutes later, he phoned and said, we found it. You can come and get it, and I'd like it back, but you can make photocopies. And so Al and Linda both have copies now, and you can look at it. I mean, it's got all sorts of fantastic information on there, IQs and stuff like that. From grade 7 to grade 12, not 7th grade to 12th grade, because in Canadians say grade whatever, not something or other grade. He received 150 different letter grades, right? Usually 4 for each subject each year. 150 letter grades, and in total, exactly half of those, 75, were A's, and 47 were B's. He did have 1 D, but he got a B the next time in that science class. Well, he went on to UBC for a couple of years, and then when the family moved to New York, he came back to Tennessee, and I guess that really, is his story growing up in West Vancouver. Hopefully you have learned something about Norman and his time there. But I'm going to tell you one more thing, and I'm quite sure that you don't know this, and I doubt very much that Linda knows this either. I spoke to several people who were in his class from 1958 and just before coming here, and one of the ladies, when I said, what do you remember about Norman? Right away she said, the thing I remember most was when we were in junior high and he ate a spider for $5. Someone said that they'd give him the money if he did it. And she said she saw him do it, so it wasn't just like, you know, that somebody had said. $5, of course, back then was quite a bit of money in 1955. But I guess you know now how he earned his pocket money.
I want to thank everyone for being here today. This has been about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I was contacted by Claiborne about this tribute, and I was actually stunned. I never knew Norman personally. He was 5 or 6, 7 years older than me. I think I heard that he had been killed in Vietnam. I was over in Vietnam at the time with a different unit, the 101st Airborne. He was with the Marines up in the DMZ. And when I came back and was going through Special Forces training, I heard that he'd been killed and was buried here. And it had an impact on me. And every year that I've come back here, I've always gone to Norman's gravesite. My parents are buried very close to Norman. And always wondered what his life would have been like if he had lived and gone on and married and had children. I know as a young lieutenant when I was in Vietnam, and a number of my men were killed in battle. And I'm the one, we have some corpsmen here, and I'm with my medic, and we're putting them into these rubber body bags and zipping them up and sending them home. And you're wondering, what is the effect? What is the effect from Vietnam back to those towns they were from? This is the effect. A life cut short, but he stepped forward to serve our country. And I'm just so appreciative that Al and other members of this Taylor family have come together to put this together. It means a lot to me personally to see that. I always felt like it was unfinished business, that we really never recognized his sacrifice. I worked and raised a lot of money for the war, the Vietnam War wall that was built in Washington. We just dedicated a beautiful Vietnam memorial on the grounds of the state capitol in Austin. And we had 3,500 men and a few women from Texas who gave their lives in Vietnam. And we put replicas of their dog tags inside of the memorial presentation. It means a lot that these fine men are remembered. And this family has remembered Norman Lane today, and I am eternally grateful. And thank you.
Totally scared to death up there. When Al asked me to do this, I said, put me on last and have a corpsman. The reason I wanted on last was try to build up my courage out there to get up there and do it. It didn't work. But he got me not only one corpsman, but he got me 2 corpsmen. And it was the 2 corpsmen that served with me in Vietnam. Destiny, you know. I joined the Marine Corps, and when the Marine Corps is a unique bunch. You have your songs that the military branches have, like the Army, as the caissons go rolling along. That's like maybe you're going to take a little walk out and do the park. The Navy, ankles away. You're going to sail around to all these exotic ports. The Air Force, you're going to, but right now they say join the Air Force and learn how to operate a computer. The Marine Corps, first to fight for right and freedom. Our flag unfurls and
every breeze where we can take a gun. You join the Marine Corps to go to war and fight for this country. Period. That's it. In the Marine Corps, you have like 03s. I was 0331, machine gun. Anybody else in the Marine Corps that's not 03 is there to support 03s. We are for fighting. Now, I joined the Marine Corps, and I went to Paris Island, went to Camp Geiger, went to Camp Lejeune. At Lejeune, I went on the med cruise. 6 months on the ABA. Don't talk to me about going on a cruise. That's all the cruise I ever want in my life. While I was over there, when we first got there, we pulled an operation on the island of Sardinia against the French Marines as training. We came back on ship, and we're going to Marseille, France. I've got a tour to Paris. We're storing our gear, and the captain of the ship comes on, and he said, President Johnson has just called. Israel and Egypt are at war, and we're going to sail down to the coast of Israel and sail in square circles. I turned to my sergeant and I said, Sarge, what's a square circle? We went down there, and by the time we got there, it was over. But we didn't get to go to Marseille before it was too long. Well, from there, we just sailed around, and everything was fine. So we came 6 months, came back to the States. At that time, all the guerrilla warfare school was done at Camp Pendleton. But while we was gone, they had set up a guerrilla warfare school there at Lejeune. So I went through that, came to Brownsville, 30 days. Then I had orders to go to MAC, Military Aircraft Command, Travis Air Force Base, California. So I get there and I walk in. It's just a matter of going in there, giving you paperwork, and you walk out. Wrong. I got there and they said, who are you? What do you want? Well, I got orders to come here. We don't have anything on you. Well, there's my orders. Well, I tell you what, just go on to Okinawa, and by the time you get there, we'll get it sorted out. So I'm in there for 3 hours alone, instead of just going in, coming out, and going on. So I walked out, I walked down the steps, and I turned left on the sidewalk, and I'm walking down through there, and here comes this officer's car. Well, I give him my best salute, and when I get to the front bumper of this car, I move over, and the doors start opening. In the back seat, coming out the door, Norman, there was me. And I said, Norman! Now, if you're enlisted in the Marine Corps, and you call an officer by his first name, the first thing they're going to do is give the firing squad live ammunition. And then it gets worse. But Norman got out with that little smile of his, put his arm around me, and we talked there for a minute. We walked over the side, and he said, Allen, in front of these other officers, you need to call me Lieutenant Lane. I know. So we separated them. So I catch my flight to Okinawa, and I'm pretty sure Norman was on that flight, but rank has its privileges. They sat in first class, and we sat back in coach. Then when you get to Okinawa, officers first, and then us. So I didn't see Norman in Okinawa. So I'm there for 3 weeks. What do you want? I'm trying to get the bigger done. Get everybody help me. So finally I get my orders in his name. I get there. Kilo 34, Don Hall. So I get up there and you get all your rifles and all your gear. You go out and push with 3 4 of us. And we was at a place called the Warshout, halfway between Cam Road and County Inn. So everything's pretty whatever there. But the NBA likes to probe your lines at night. And they come up, and in the book, you take a machine gun and you set it down at night. Then you put it back up in the daytime. We didn't do that. We left the gun up all the time. Well, they trying to figure out where everything is. And I had told my gunners, if they probe the line, show them where you are. Show them everything you got. Show them where you are. Well, I've been there about 2 weeks, and sure enough, man, one night, it was terrible. And I got up, and that firefight lasted about 3 to 5 hours. In reality, 3 to 5 minutes. But anyway, after it was over, one of my gunners come to me and was busted me away, said, my gun quit firing. Well, all the light we had was candlelight. M60's got 284 component parts. And as Kenny Schrader would say, I think it was a pretty important internal part. It's probably malfunction. So it probably ain't nothing I can do anyway. So I get up the next morning, and I go to the lieutenant, and I tell him I got a busted yoke after I tore it apart. He said, well, Battalion armor is back at C2. He said, catch your next truck down to C2. So I grab my yoke, my Matty Mattel rifle, and I get down to C2. Well, it's about like the campgrounds out here. There's nothing more. You don't know where you're at. You're just walking around. Well, I get by this bunker, and this shirtless Marine comes up, and he throws out his shave water. He'd been shaving. Well, I'm right there back. Yeah, my boots are muddy. They're nasty. My uniform's dirty. But you don't want somebody throwing your shave water on you. So I look around and I start telling him how much I appreciate it. And he starts to apologize. Norman Edward Lane. So we talked there, and then we're both in the same unit. And so I get my everything and go back up. So from then on, our togetherness was at Norman's when he, I mean, as an E4, you don't go up to the captain and say, Captain, I'd like to go to Korea this afternoon and visit with Lieutenant Lane. Well, you're going to take some cake and ice cream? So when I see Norman, it was whenever he could come up to see me. And time was pretty busy. But he did make it up quite a bit, and I always saved the state's graphic for him. And so he'd come up, and we'd sit there, and you know, like in the Marine Corps, the guy under me was Richard L. Sadler from Hartford, Connecticut. My point man was George DeSoto from Houston, Texas. My radio man was Charles Russell Jerome Minton III from Charlotte, North Carolina. So what did we have in common other than being in the Marine Corps? But Norman and I, we knew y'all. We'd get together, we'd talk about y'all. Amazing. Just amazing to be with somebody from Brownsville, Tennessee. And we really enjoyed it. Now, I've read about this everywhere. Some of you probably seen it. Thanksgiving night, the night before Thanksgiving, went to the squad meeting. Every night you go up there and the lieutenant tells you what you're going to do the next day. So I went up there that night and he said, good news, bad news. Good news, tomorrow, they're coming out from Don Hall. They're going to bring us turkey, dressing, potatoes, cranberry sauce, milk. Now every meal we get in a can. Comes in a can. You open it up, heat it up, give you those heat tablets, which I think is what tear gas is made out of. The wind's blowing and that hits you, you gasp and fire. But we learned. We carried a 2-pound block of C4, which was explosive. But you can cut into that C4, and you get your little bitty ball of it, and you can put it down, you stick a match to it, you can have a cup of coffee in about 3 to 5 seconds. The bad part, when you get up in the DMZ, and you run into a bunker complex, and they say, bring your C4. Well, we're very limited to C4. But, so the next morning we get up, and the bad news was we got a patrol tomorrow. So it's a suicide patrol. So we get up and we making us leave. And I hear on the radio, we spotted movement to the front. Well, normally, movement to the front is no big deal. As long as you see movement, you got it made. You got fast burners out on the Kitty Hawk. You got gunships down at Fubai. And you got artillery down at Don Hawk. End of movement. Now this is Thanksgiving. on Thanksgiving, we can't fire unless fire at. So we have to proceed. So we get down there, and there's 3 women and 1 old man. So we think they're out there hiding ammunition, guns, or something. So we call down the hall, I tell them we got these people. Well, stand by, we'll send choppers out. This is about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. 4 o'clock, the choppers come in. Well, we get back in the perimeter, chow's gone. So I'm taking my gear and I'm throwing it out. And I look up, and here comes Lieutenant Lane. He's got a can of sea ration turkey and a cup of cranberry sauce. That's all. Cranberry sauce is all that was left. And he brought it over to me, and he said, I wanted you to have the Thanksgiving dinner. And he had come all the way up to be with me on Thanksgiving. And from that day to this, is the best Thanksgiving I have ever had. Now, we went on and we were separated, and I went on over to GLN, and I always saved the safe graphic paper for Norman. And then we came back together, and we was together a little bit longer. And it was just wonderful to have been there with somebody from Brownsville. You will never know how much that meant. And I just, when that machine gun yoke busted, when I was a senior out here at Haywood, and I don't remember what class it was, but they had some World War II veterans come out there. And one of the veterans that came out there was Mr. Jerry Kaiser. And he was in the Marine Corps in the South Pacific. And he had related the story about they had gotten in a firefight, and his machine gun had tore up. So now 3 years later, I'm in Vietnam with a tore up machine gun. So all you young men out there, it could happen. You could hear me talk about it in 3, 5, 10 years, and I hope not. You could be in a combat zone with a busted machine gun. And another thing that I'll leave with you young men is a saying from General William Tecumseh Sherman. He said, boys, you might think war is all glory. Boys, war is all hate. Thank you.
Well, we've come full circle, as life always is that way. Just listening to all of these memorabilias, this is just a magnificent event. I want to go back to the 23rd Psalm for a second and deal with the Hebraic formulas of the word shepherd. It's an interesting term. It means leading. It also means to be led. And the thing that we leave that's leading by our own being led is the legacy of our influence. This place is influential. You are influential. And so our benediction today is a word of thanks to those who serve, who are being served, who lead because they have been led. Thanks be to God.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. Thanks for everybody who participated, whether you were sitting in the audience or whether you were giving a talk, or whether you were performing. Just even though I've known the plan for some time, it's been phenomenal. Joe is going to go outside, and those of you that would like to and are able to, we're going to walk up to the cemetery, specifically to Norman's gravesite, and pay respects there. As you walk out, preferably this side door, Joe is going to be at the bell, and it's going to ring, as you hear, 7 times. And the 7 number is significant because in our research we identified, actually through the help of Cole Thornton, the specific platoon at the basic school in Norman Lane's time in officer candidacy course at Quantico from 1966 to 1967. His class graduated on March 29, 1967, 1 year to the date before his loss in Vietnam. We identified 3 other men who survived from that platoon of about 50 men. Norman and 6 others from that platoon were lost in Vietnam. And so we ring the bell in remembrance of those 7, as well as all the others. Thank you.